Great, thanks for that introduction, and thank you for everyone taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We're very excited about sharing some of our results from this project with you. So this is our analysis of the cybersecurity resilience for regional economic stability. As Aaron introduced, I'm Ian, and I'll be joined by May, who will be leading our live demonstration of the REMI model today. So just a quick agenda, brief introduction of ourselves and REMI. Then we're going to sort of define resilience and cybersecurity resilience in the context of economic stability. We're going to analyze the economic costs of cyber attacks, see that they come up in a few different forms. Then May is going to cover some critical investments that could be made to the United States economy and infrastructure to put us in a better position to be better prepared for cyber attacks. And that'll be followed by a live model demo using the REMI model. And then we're going to draw some conclusions from that, and there'll be time, as Aaron said, for Q&A at the end. So at any point we weren't clear on anything, please feel free to use the chat feature to put your questions in, and we will answer them at the end. So just a brief intro about us. I don't know how familiar everyone is with REMI. We're the nation's leader in dynamic state, local, and national policy modeling. So we are not an advocacy organization, but we help a lot of different organizations with their economic modeling needs. We were founded in 1980 on a transformative idea that government decision makers should be able to test out the economic impacts of their policies before they're actually implemented. So these could be transportation changes in tax policy, different business incentives, whatever policies policymakers are thinking of implementing. We have a very insightful tool, a suite of insightful tools that allows them to explore what the rippling economic effects of those policies will be before they're actually enacted. So as we'll see today, we're going to be exploring the effects of different cybersecurity scenarios, but we're not all limited to that. There's a whole host of economic scenarios that we can test before actually enacting any policy. So just more about us and our clients. We have a lot of different clients. We're both very proud of our models at REMI, but also proud of the work that our clients are able to do with our models. Whole host of different types of organizations. There's nonprofits, think tanks, government organizations, universities, consulting firms, metropolitan planning organizations, as well as some state agencies. Are very diverse set of models that a lot of different people have been able to find creative solutions for, and our simple goal is just to improve public policies. So our approach and applications, it's a very rigorous economic modeling software. It's been around since the 80s. It's peer reviewed and all the equations are public, so it's sort of a top of the line, very robust model. You can see here, it's applied in a host of different situations all across the country. And we will be sharing these slides at the end of the presentation. So if you want to follow up about anything, this will all be available. So now getting into resilience and how we're going to define that in terms of cyber attacks. So resilience is just defined as the ability to recover or adjust to a change in circumstances. We've seen the American economy is resilient in some ways, but not as resilient to other changes. So one area that we think maybe is a bit of a weakness for the American economy in terms of resilience is in terms of cybersecurity. And we're going to explore some potential investments that could put us in a better situation moving forward. Some examples of resilience here could be infrastructure failures, natural disasters, cyber attacks, or recession, industry, labor shifts. And today we will just be specifically focusing on the cyber attack scenario. So a 2018 Council on Economic Affairs report detailed some of the critical industries in terms of cyber attacks, so ones that might be in sort of the most vulnerable position for cyber attacks. These four industries were finance and insurance, manufacturing, energy, and retail. Came to these conclusions based on three factors: the frequency of attacks, the relative exposure, basically vulnerability to attack, and how much of a public threat that would cause. So an example like retail, it might not shut down the national economy, but it has been a growing threat in terms of frequency of attacks. There's been a lot of small, seemingly insignificant attacks, just a few hundred or a few $100,000 or a few $1,000s on a lot of small retail stores. So it doesn't make the national headlines. You're not going to read about it in the New York Times, but it is a growing threat and sort of a growing pain for small business owners in the country. But some of these other sectors like finance, manufacturing, and energy may not happen as frequently, sort of a larger coordinated attack, but these are the ones that have been growing, you sort of have been hearing about more. They have usually better cybersecurity infrastructure, big financial firms or manufacturing or energy firms, but it poses a lot larger public threat. So if as we saw with the Colonial Pipeline situation, when the energy sector is attacked, fortunately that situation was worked out fairly smoothly, but there is a serious potential there for a long-term economic slowdown from attacks on things like the energy sector. So now we're going to go into sort of defining those economic costs of cyber attacks, because it can be a lot more than just the initial upfront payment or loss of revenue from the initial attack. So there's a variety of different types of cyber attacks, and they can impose different types of economic costs. Perpetrators can be nation states, corporate competitors seeking to gain an edge by disabling a competitor, organized criminal groups. This is something that we've seen rise a lot internationally. It can be company insiders. This could be anything from a disgruntled employee who wants to sort of take revenge on an old boss or something, and similarly hacktivists. So these are people who have a political agenda, and they find that cyber attacks may be the quickest way to get to it. So a common example of this is green or climate activists who will try to hack into large emitters of greenhouse gases to try to slow them down. The cost components are sort of more complicated. So there's, the initial economic costs, but there can also be loss of intellectual property. So if IP is hacked into and those secrets are released, there's an economic cost there. There's a loss of revenue, increased costs of capital. So companies now have to increase more in different types of cybersecurity, and that increases their capital costs. Settlements. So as we saw with the Colonial Pipeline attack, there's just a payment made to restore everything that the hackers got into. And then there's also reputational damage. So say if a financial firm has a data breach that makes them look worse in the public eye, and there's certainly an economic cost to that. So some of these costs are sort of more hard to quantify than just the initial, say, paying out a settlement to hackers, but there are certainly economic costs there. A few notes from that Council of Economic Advisors report. It's estimated that it was between 57 billion and 109 billion in just in the year 2016. That's just for the U.S. and that's growing. It's been a growing number for the last 10 or 15 years. The costs associated, again, hard to exactly nail down a specific number, but it's estimated that it'll reach $1 trillion annually, and that is about 1% of global GDP, to just put that in scale. So it's a massive number that is potentially being affected here, and some serious economic challenges could be ahead if this issue is not addressed. Lack cybersecurity imposes a negative economic externality. So for some companies, their cyber plan may just be to pay off the ransom whenever it comes to them, which may work for a large company that has a large budget, and if they can set aside a few $1 million to just pay off a ransom, that may work for them, but it creates a negative externality for everyone else, because then perpetrators see that there is money to be made, and if there's not going to be a fight up or any better security or defenses, they're going to keep doing that. So while that may work for some firms, that's a really poor strategy for the country as a whole to just plan on paying off the ransom. And attacks also cause ripple effects through the economy beyond just the targeted entity. So again, as we saw with Colonial Pipeline, there's the initial loss of revenue for just that company, but that also creates ripple effects throughout the economy. There could be shutdowns, slowdowns, infrastructure problems, supply chain snags that cause much more loss than just the initial targeted industry. So some last notes on the economic costs. Common consensus that the United States is overexposed. We haven't built up enough resources against cyber attacks. The investment can be a tough sell because it requires a significant upfront investment, and the losses and the avoided losses or the gains are sort of hard to quantify. And so you don't really see them as much. And so it's hard to convince a company or a nation to bear the significant burden of an upfront cost when they're sort of going to get the ROI from that several years down the road. But it's certainly the right move to make. And lastly, the need for economic modeling and planning. It's a useful tool to determine the correct amount and the correct allocation of investment in cybersecurity. So you don't want to overinvest, you don't want to underinvest, and economic modeling can help you find that right equilibrium of one, the right amount to invest, and also the proper allocation of that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to May, and May is going to talk about some critical investments that the United States can make, as well as doing the live demonstration using the REMI model.
Thank you, Ian. So when we talk about the cybercrime, we want to invest in the cybersecurity. And cybersecurity and cybercrime grow and build off each other in a never-ending cycle, driving a need for increased investment alongside them. And below is a typical cybersecurity technology cycle. So step one is the increased cyber operations incidents. And so step two, we want to add technology and add people and processes. So vendor pitch new technology as the solution to cyber operations incidences. And for people and process, there is new technology which requires more people and processes. And step three is the operational complexity increases. The interactions between technology, processes, and people increase. And the step four is the loss of process visibility and control. So there's uncertainty about developments, and the old management systems are overwhelmed. And step five is the poor human performance. Technology and process complexity decrease cybersecurity effectiveness. And then so the cycle will just start all over again from step one. And as new devices and software come online, old methods used by cyber criminals are replaced by new ones. And therefore, investments in cybersecurity is expected to keep growing in importance and size as well. However, making the right investment decision is never easy. Again, let's look at the most targeted industries. So the data showed finance, manufacturing, energy, and retail at the top of the list. This information is very helpful, but how do we know that the top industries are just the best solution? In this case, where regional economy is hit by cyber attacks, we ask the following questions. Which industry or industries should be prioritized for protection? And what is the proper amount of investment in cybersecurity? And the third question is, what are the economic impacts? So to answer those questions, it's very important to model resilience. Resilience can sometimes be an unusual topic when we talk about economics, typically when people are focusing more on the efficiency side. So resilience does not seem like the most efficient thing to be investing in, but it's very critical to be aware of the potential results of cyber hacking. With the economic models, you can quantify these values of having the resilient system, and you can alert people to the risks of not having them. So in this case, policymakers can be proactive when establishing policies to promote resilience at the local, state, and regional levels. So next, I will go through the modeling, the model first, and then the modeling methodology. I will show the live E3 Plus model demo, and I will show the results as well. E3 Plus is the premier software solution for analyzing the macroeconomic and demographic impacts of any initiatives related to the energy and environmental sectors. Decision makers depend on E3 Plus to provide comprehensive evaluations of the total economic impact of alerting electric rates, introducing new power sources, investing the production of energy, and also other policy changes. And as a framework for this analysis, we want to show this diagram. This table shows the interactions of the different economic variables with E3 Plus. Once we change one variable, as we can see, the change will be modeled as this ripples through the whole economy. So when we measure resilience with E3 Plus, we use the future study, especially the disaster resilience study. It is a feature exclusive to E3 Plus. It's a tool for evaluating the effectiveness of multiple disaster recovery and mitigation plans in terms of how well they reduce the economic impact of a simulated disaster. This type of study aims to help users design and implement plans that improve the resilience of their economies in the face of disaster shock. And E3 Plus can also produce an automatic calculation discussing resilience through a forecast resiliency report. And this compares a no action baseline disaster scenario to a resilience investment scenario. E3 Plus also produces a resilience loss reduction potential figure. It's also as known as RLRP. So in a demonstration, I will show this application in our cybersecurity scenarios, and I will show how helpful this figure will be. Here's how we will model the scenarios. We will focus on two regions, far west and southwest, considering investments in the top two industries, which are financial sector and manufacturing sector. So in total, we will have 4 resilient scenarios showing the allocation of resources into different regions and also different industries. In specific, we will run the scenarios of years 2021 and 2022 for control forecasts representing the cyber attack shock. We will input about $700 and $600 million downward revision in output for far west and southwest respectively. But for the investment plans, where we simply assume that we will like the input, we will like the output for each industry to increase by $100 million. So now we're going to show off the model and explore more about the job, about the impact and loss avoided by the investment. The model we're using is the BA E3 Plus model, which splits the US into 8 main regions. The home screen's purpose here, so we're looking at the home screen of E3 Plus here. The purpose is to provide quick and simple access points for starting your use of the REMI model and to simulate policy changes. By clicking on the appropriate tile, you're able to start creating any one of the 4 types of forecasts available. So the most commonly used one is the new region simulation, and also there are new national simulation, new regional control, new national control. But if you're interested in the REMI baseline forecast, you can click on regional forecast or national forecast. Let's do regional forecast here for an example. this will bring you directly to the results section. So here we see that in the profiles, we have economic summaries showing all the important economic indicators here for all regions, as well as the eight main regions separately. And also some specific tables, maps, and data visualizations have been specially chosen to display REMI's baseline forecast and also provide informative profiles of the regional forecast and as well as the national forecast. But today, we are using the exclusive feature of with E3 Plus, which is the natural disaster resilience. So when we want to create a new study here, we choose the type we want. And here we can see we have two simulations to create. The first one is the disaster baseline control. In our case, we try to add a disaster policy variable here. As I mentioned, we were doing the output here. After we select the policy variable, we choose the options, industries. We're doing decrease in output for all industries here, and for region, for example, we're doing Far West. So here we have added a new policy variable, and the next step is to input some values. For example, we can do negative $700 million here, and we can add it to the input. We repeat the same step, but with different selection of industries, because we want to see investment into different sectors. And also we input different numbers for the output. And after adding both the disaster baseline control and the resilience scenario, we'll go to the next step and to run the study. And then we will have a baseline with no resilience system and a resilience scenario with the system. So I have already run these two studies for different regions separately. Let's look at the Far West resilience study first. Now we're looking at the results section, and below we can see the resiliency report. The resilience scenario 1 is representing the investment in financial sector for Far West. We can first look at the inputs. So the input here for the baseline is representing the cyber attack. And just as I mentioned, the only difference is in the industry and in the number of output increase. Let's get back to the results here. We can see that the model has shown the total maximum loss potential is $2.9 billion. But with the resilience system, the avoided loss due to resilience measures is about $0.4 billion. And dividing this avoided value by the total maximum loss potential, we can have this resilience loss reduction potential, which is about 14%. This red line below is representing the disaster baseline control, and the upper one is representing the resilience scenario. So we can know that the area, the light green area between these two lines are just the avoided loss. And similarly, we can look at the second scenario, which is for the investment in manufacturing sector. They have the same loss potential because this value is the result of the baseline control, and they share the same baseline control. But the avoided loss due to resilience measures are different. And as a result, they have different resilience loss reduction potential. This is pretty interesting because the investment for manufacturing is having a higher potential rate than that of the financial sector, although financial sector is actually the top one industry that is under impact. For the Southwest resilience study, it's more like a replicate of the one for Far West, but the only difference is it's in the numbers, because we're also looking at the financial and manufacturing sector. Scenario 4 here is representing financial sector. We noticed that the total maximum loss potential has increased from 2.9 to $3.1 billion. This is because now we're looking at the baseline representing the cyber attack loss in Southwest instead of Far West. So this is a different baseline. And this is the avoided loss, and we have the resilience loss reduction potential. Scenario 5 representing manufacturing sector. Again, this plan is kind of beating the plan of investing in financial sector because it has a higher potential rate here. And after looking at the demo, here I put the results into a table so we can have a glance at all 4 resilient scenarios. With the E3 Plus feature, even though the investment plans are for different regions and for different sectors, we can still compare them through the resilience loss reduction potential. So we can see that when we try to increase the same amount in output for different regions and different sectors, we can compare this number. We see the investment in manufacturing sector to fight against the cyber attack loss in Southwest seem to win this game. So this is how E3 Plus can help you to quantify the loss and the avoided loss and to choose the best solution among all you have. So now I'm going to give it back to Ian for the conclusion.
Great, thanks, May. So we will just briefly wrap up here with some high-level takeaways and conclusions from that analysis. So some notable results. Cyber attacks are a growing threat to the economy with some significant ripple effects. It seems to be something that both parties in Congress have some agreement on, that some critical economic investments in cybersecurity would have serious long-term benefits. So we're likely to see some policy coming through in the next several months to address the issue, which is great. And we'll probably see some significant investment on the private side as well. One of our key takeaways is that investment can do some serious mitigation to those losses. It's a tough sell because it requires millions of dollars in upfront costs, but there's potentially billions in avoided losses. So it's a significant return on investment. Economic modeling is a great key tool to addressing this issue. as well as many other different economic sort of threats and scenarios. Robust modeling is a key step in effectively planning that infrastructure. So as we said, in determining the correct amount of investment and also the right allocation of investment, economic modeling, such as the REMI model, is a very key tool. And forecasting gives you the option to generate a mix of different scenarios. So the scenario that May just walked us through was just one of several different potential scenarios that could happen. And it's nice that the model lets you accurately check on different variables and how they would react to different scenarios. And finally, as we said, a resource allocation. The size, scope, and location of the cybersecurity infrastructure should be tailored to those exact threat risks. So the model lets us sort of play with different industries and see how different industries would react, which ones are more vulnerable, and we can allocate the investment in the cybersecurity to those most vulnerable industries. So just to wrap up on economic modeling, it allows us to clarify the issues that we're facing and what the implications of different policies to address those would be. It allows us to make predictions about the effects of those different policies. The REMI model is very, very accurate. It's been back tested. So the predictions that the REMI model makes for different sectors of the economy are very reliable. It allows us to tailor our response to mitigate the negative downturns of potential effects and also to maximize different opportunities that the economy prevents. And finally, economic modeling is a great way to inform policy. So both to inform constituents or also other policymakers with a set of key metrics as opposed to rather just pursuing one idea of a response. It allows you to have a very data-driven analytical approach to different issues like we saw with cybersecurity today. So that can be used for both addressing policymakers, but also for addressing stakeholders and telling them about why these issues are so important.